All right, so we are starting video number 2, and this video is going to focus specifically on our subphylum. So we saw that there's 3 subphyla within our phylum. We have Chordata, Cephalochordata, and then Vertebrata. So Chordata, those are the tunicates. Cephalochordata, those are the lancelets. And then Vertebrata is pretty much everything else within our phylum. So we have 2 superclasses here. We have Superclass Agnatha. Those, again, are the organisms A, meaning without, so without jaws. Hagfishes and lampreys. And then we have Superclass Agnatha, and that's going to be us and all of our close relatives. So let's get started. So, Superclass Agnatha, again, these are the jawless fishes. And so what they don't have is they don't have fins. They're fish, but they don't have fins. They have no scales, and they don't have a very well-developed vertebrae. So these are going to be organisms that are just one step up from lancelets. In fact, if you remember from the last video, the diagram of a lancelet, they're almost exactly the same. They're pretty much exactly the same body style. Hagfishes, or excuse me, these jawless fishes just get a little bit larger, hagfishes specifically, get a little bit larger, but they're pretty similar. So they don't have fins, they don't have scales, they don't have a well-developed spinal column in any capacity. We have hagfishes, which are the slime eels. Hagfishes are gross. So they use mucus for protection. This is actually a person gathering just the mucus out of the water of hagfishes. They're pretty gross, okay? So hagfishes are, again, slime eels. They feed on decaying flesh. So even though they're gross, they are extremely important decomposers. So they, in the ocean, are going to be the first things that arrive at like a whale fall where a whale dies or something like that. Fish, anything else that might die in the ocean or in any kind of body of water like that, they're going to probably be the first ones to arrive. The second group are the lampreys. So hagfishes just have a mouth with some tentacles. Lampreys, this is the mouth, the inside of a lamprey mouth. So they are obviously going to be a little bit more parasitic. They're going to be going for something that's not dead because with that tooth structure, they're very similar to a leech. And so what they do is they kind of start chewing into the exterior of an organism, usually a fish or some sort of shark or whale or something like that. And they use those hooked teeth to hold on and then kind of just pull tissue as well as blood out of the body as it goes along. They're parasitic, but because of their size, you can see here on this fish in the background, well, you can't, let me hide myself. You can see on this fish in the background that due to their size, sometimes with smaller fish, they are parasitic, but they do cause them to die because they end up taking too much blood, or they when they detach, they leave these open sores, and so those open sores can become infected very easily, and obviously that can be an issue for a fish. So now we move into our superclass, Agnatha. So these are the organisms that have jaws that are actually functional. So the jawed organisms, or the with jaws. So the first group is the group with jaws. This is class Chondrichthyes. So CH makes a K sound. Chondrichthyes. T-H-Y-E-S is these. So already off the bat, we see sharks, skates, rays, chimeras. So we have some whale shark down here on the right. We have another shark, another whale shark. Well, this is actually the basking shark, but whatever. And then we have rays. We have some chimera. This is a chimera up here in this left corner. The reason they're called chimeras is chimera in Greek mythology was an organism that was kind of a cross between 2 organisms, kind of a hybrid. And this one was weird, is that, you know, when scientists discovered it, it has a face that's not typical. It's very kind of mammal-like almost in the structure of its face, kind of like a dog or a cat. Yet the rest of its body is very shark-like, so it looked like it was a hybrid between the 2. We have a sawfish here. So we have, again, skates, rays, chimeras, and sharks. So to start on some of the anatomy, I want to hit on some of the anatomy of some of these organisms, okay? So first thing is fins. So again, the mouth and everything is going to be at the front. The pectoral fins, now again, we look at the shark on its side, but we have to realize that if we stood it up on its tail, like us, then the pectoral fins would be coming out of what is our chest, so where our pectoral muscles are. So the pectoral fins are the ones that are coming out of the chest of the shark, and this is going to be true of fish as well. And then dorsal fins are very obvious. That's on the dorsal side, the back of the organism. A lot of times they have pelvic fins and anal fins. Those are kind of obvious, so you can figure out where they are. Pelvic fins are going to be close to what we would call the pelvis. So again, if we were to stand this shark up, the pectoral muscles would be up here, pelvis would be kind of in the middle, and then the anus would be further down, and so the anal fin would be a little further down. And then the final fin is referred to as the caudal fin, C-A-U-D-A-L. And the caudal fin is essentially the tail fin, kind of the end fin. It's the posterior most fin. So the fin that's at the back is the caudal fin. So I mentioned that because we're going to mention these fins a couple times. So Chondrichthyes, organisms in class Chondrichthyes are cartilaginous fishes. So they are fish, but their internal skeletons are made of cartilage, and so that makes them not a traditional fish that we think of when we think of like a goldfish or a grouper or some other type of fish that we're used to seeing. So these cartilaginous fishes, again, are fishes, but their internal skeleton is made of cartilage rather than bone. They have what's referred to as a heterocircle tail. So when we're talking about their tail, we're again talking about their caudal fin, and something very unique to cartilaginous sharks is that the top part is usually larger than the bottom part. So that's what we mean by heterocircle. Hetero is a prefix that means different, and so we're saying that the tail has different parts to it. The top and the bottom are two different parts. And circle, C-E-R-C-A-L, it is not talking about a circle, so no, I did not misspell circle. It's just another term discussing the caudal fin. So again, what's unique about these fish is that they have cartilage skeletons, they have tails, caudal fins that have different sizes to them. So the top and the bottom are different sizes. They have two dorsal fins, and they have paired pectoral muscles. So they use those for kind of navigation in the water. Now, some things about sharks that are unique, or cartilaginous fishes that are unique, is that they have gill slits, but they don't have any way to pump water through them. So this is why, if you've ever heard, if you take a shark and you stop it from moving, it dies. That's true. They have to keep moving or they suffocate, because the thing is that they simply just have gill slits. So they open their mouth, and if you see sharks in the water, they almost always have their mouth open. It's not to scare you with their teeth, although quite often their teeth do prevent their mouth from closing. But they have to keep their mouth open because as they move through the water, that water needs to pass through their mouth, over their gills, and then out their gill slits. So you'll see when we get to the next class, they have developed something a little bit more unique, but this is something unique, but this draws it back to what we saw in the hagfishes, the lampreys, the tunicates, and the lancelets, where they just had those pharyngeal slits. They just had those openings. And so this is the class Chondrichthyes. These are the most primitive of all the fish. But when we say primitive, we also mean ancient. Sharks are the first organisms in this group that really developed. And so they are some of the most ancient creatures on the planet. And they have kidneys. So we're getting to the point now where their internal body systems are going to be very similar to ours, and specifically with their excretory system. And this was very important for organisms that started developing in the ocean and started kind of moving throughout their habitat, because they need to be able to make sure that the salt doesn't build up inside their body. So they needed kidneys to kind of start getting that process down of eliminating that so that they can keep an internal body that's going to have a lot of features similar to us. So the second class here is Osteichthyes. So Chondrichthyes, Osteichthyes. And so some people say Osteichthyes, but that just sounds fancy to me. But Osteichthyes, these are the bony fishes. So these are the fishes that have true skeletons. These are the first organisms within our superclass Agnatha, and truly within our whole phylum, that actually have a bone structure on the inside. Another thing they have is a swim bladder. Now, swim bladder sounds gross, but basically it's a pocket of air inside their body, and it's kept very close to their, or it's very vascularized. It's kept very close to their circulatory system because many fish are able to pass air from their blood vessels into their swim bladder and vice versa, so that they can raise and lower in the water column. Now, other fish, like betta fish, they have to actually swallow the air to fill their swim bladder. So if you've ever seen fish, aquarium fish, a lot of aquarium fish, specifically bettas, they go to the surface and they gulp air. It's not because that's how they're breathing. They're filling their swim bladder, so they have that ability to contract it and move up and down. And then as it starts to deflate, they swim back to the surface, refill it, and then they can do that again. The second thing that we see developing in Osteichthyes is an operculum. So the operculum is a bony-like structure that goes over their gills, and they use it to open in sync with their mouth to create a vacuum. So that's why bony fishes do not have to continue moving constantly. They can stop. They can stop their movement, and then they can hide and just breathe in one spot, because they can create that vacuum to pull the water through, rather than what we saw in class Chondrichthyes, where they had to keep constantly moving in order to survive. Unlike class Chondrichthyes, Osteichthyes has a homocircle tail. So homo means same, and so that means the top and the bottom are almost exactly the same, usually pretty exactly the same, maybe slightly off, but they're almost exactly the same. And then what's unique about them is that they have developed I don't know why I got country all of a sudden, bony scales. And so for defense, class Chondrichthyes, they do have some scale-like structures. If you've ever touched shark skin, if you haven't, go to the aquarium at some point, go to the fish tank, or don't just like bust into the fish tank, let me be clear. Go to the touch tank, and you can feel the stingrays, and if you feel them one direction, they're almost slimy feeling or smooth, but if you run your finger back, they're very sharp. So they have very sharp, unique scale-like things. Some of them do. But bony fishes are the first to have true bony scales. So they have these scales that grow similar to our fingernails, where they have rings and layers in them. So class Amphibia, you'll notice that I don't find a whole lot of joy in amphibians and reptiles. Not because I'm scared of them, they're just boring to me. But class amphibians, they are cold-blooded organisms. So that is also referred to as an ectotherm. So what that means is ecto, like ectoderm, the outside skin layer. Ectotherm means that they get all of their heat from their surroundings. And so what that means is that they don't really produce a lot of their own heat. They can't regulate their own body temperature. They rely on surrounding areas, which is why you find a lot of amphibians and reptiles exposing themselves to the sun or to hot pavement or rocks or things like that, because they need to be able to keep that that kind of sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyways, I'm back. They need to be able to get that energy into their body constantly. Many of them have gill slits when they're young, but then they develop into lungs as adult, as most of them become either terrestrial or they're aquatic, but not fully aquatic. They breathe air. They don't have gills usually when they're adults. Some of them do, but most of them do not. They breed in water. So this is a group, Amphibia. This group means that they really have a hard time. They move back and forth with water. They rely heavily on water. And so this was kind of that in-between group that developed from the fishes to the reptiles, where we started seeing organisms moving out of the water onto land, and some of them decided just to kind of stay in the middle. And so we see those organisms like amphibians in the middle. They undergo metamorphosis, we'll see in a second. Some of them do produce toxins, but many of them, because of the fact that they rely heavily on water, and because of the fact that they don't have a scaly exoskeleton, they just have a skin, they are very susceptible to pollution. And so that's very dangerous for them, because that makes them extremely threatened, because of the fact that pretty much anything can cause pollution to them. So amphibians are actually currently the group on the planet that is undergoing the strongest decline in their biodiversity. More amphibian species are going extinct due to pollution and due to habitat destruction than any other organisms on the planet. So this includes our traditional frogs and toads, as well as salamanders, newts, and some other types of kind of in-between things that are those unique, wet-skinned, usually, organisms. So again, we said that frogs rely on water for their reproductive process. So they lay their eggs in water. Those eggs develop into tadpoles, and then they start to develop legs. And that's kind of what an indicator for us was, that evolutionarily, legs develop after some of the other body features, which indicates to us that that means they probably evolved later in time. And so then they grow up and move on to land usually. Some of them stay in the water, but most of them move on to land. And then again, come back and rely on water for their metamorphosis process. So class Reptilia, similar to amphibians, they are cold-blooded. They require heat from outside. They have scales on their bodies, so that's different than class Amphibia. So they've developed these bony-like scales. They have an amniotic egg, which means their eggs can now grow on land because they mostly have a shell on them to keep them moist on the inside, to keep them hydrated on the inside. And they also don't require, or they can incubate for longer, so they can become larger offspring, and that don't require parental care as much, and it's a pretty smart system. They have that yolk sac to provide nourishment for them. Most of them have a dry skin, and those scales kind of help them from drying out. And many of them have a three-chambered heart, very similar to what we saw in the mollusks with their three-chambered heart. So the only organisms so far that have really had full-blown hearts, for the most part, have had three-chambered hearts, although we see some differences with some of the fish and sharks and things. So class Reptilia is a pretty diverse group as well. It includes any of our external scaled organisms. So again, scales are not the same thing as an exoskeleton, but this includes iguanas, lizards, snakes, turtles, crocodiles, etc. Class Aves, I don't like birds, so we're going to move quickly through this one. They're warm-blooded, so they're the first organisms that can really regulate their own body temperature, moving up through it. And they're really the first organisms ever that can regulate their body system or their body temperature. So it's a huge advancement in the birds, moving from the reptiles to the birds. That was a huge advancement in terms of how that worked. And we're going through these in terms of how they broke off of the evolutionary tree for the most part. So birds really came from the reptiles, and reptiles seem to have evolved similar but broken off from the amphibians. Many of them have wings. They don't all fly, but they do have wing-like structures, and they have feathers, which are evolved from scales. They're very, very similar in their composition to scales. They develop these hollow bones, and that allows them to take flight. They also have teeth that kind of evolved into an exterior structure that they can use very easily for eating and breaking down food. And then they have hard-shelled amniotic eggs. So because they're hard-shelled, they don't have to keep them hydrated as much, because now they really are watertight. And that also allows them to move on to land where it's dry, where they can lay these eggs and they're not going to immediately dry out and crack. Birds are birds. They're pretty. Next. So class Mammalia, this is our class. And so, again, warm-blooded, we can regulate our own body temperature. Similar to the way that reptiles had scales, and then they developed separately into feathers on birds. They developed separately again into fur and hair on mammals. So all mammals at some point in their development have some sort of fur or hair. Now there are things, organisms that don't have fur or hair. Those still have hair follicles, things like the naked mole rat, and they still do have whiskers. So there's still some sort of hair on their body. Now, class Mammalia is one of the first big classes to provide a lot of parental care. Now, there's going to be others sprinkled in the last few we've talked about, but because they provide a lot of parental care, our whole class is named from the fact that female organisms within our class have mammary glands. So these are glands that produce milk. And so all mammals are able, all female, assigned female organisms within class Mammalia are able to produce milk nourishment for their young. So that's a big thing that really separated us from all the others. While birds do provide parental care, they don't nurse their young in the same way that mammals do. So that was something very unique that also led our young to be very not able to defend for themselves because our class does really have to take care of our young pretty heavily. But either way. And then they use bones in their hearing. So that's something unique as well. Some examples of class Mammalia to kind of hit on our diversity. This is like a wildcat and he looks wild. So I love that picture. And then we have elephants. We have cats, dogs, humans, including queen bee. We also have marsupials, platypus. There's some weird subclasses within our class, but these are kind of all of the basics. But again, they all have some sort of fur on their body. Beyonce, as you can see, has hair. And then we have fur on the outside of these organisms. And even elephants do have some hair on their bodies as well. Okay. All right. So then our phylogenetic tree again, this is on your guided notes so you can see, but this is how we broke off ultimately at the end. We share all of these other things with all of the organisms in our class or within our phylum, but we have those special two things, hair and mammary glands, that really sets mammals apart. Okay, this is a lot more complex one. This is also on yours. You can look at that if you want to, but that is the end of this video. As you can see, it's a little bit longer. I paid to upgrade my account so I can get longer videos, but I still will try to keep them as short as possible. And that's that. Talk to you guys soon.